30 years old, I work remotely as a UX designer, which is often more stressful than it sounds. Deadlines have a way of piling up quickly, especially when I spend days cooped up in my apartment. After a challenging project submission, I decided to book a last-minute solo retreat at an Airbnb. I chose a tranquil cabin near the outskirts of Colorado, far enough away from everything to escape distractions. The listing mentioned there was no Wi-Fi or cell service, which I found quite refreshing. It was a single-story wooden cabin nestled in a clearing about 15 minutes from the nearest gas station. I packed books, downloaded some movies, and announced to everyone that I would be offline for a few days. My only worry was the weather, and it poured rain the entire way there. The cabin was small but inviting, much like those modern rustic rentals you see on social media. It had wooden floors, a low ceiling, and a stone fireplace that smelled like it had actually been used. Inside, there were 2 bedrooms and a hallway closet leading to a locked door marked as crawl space access. The first day was uneventful, peaceful, even. I set my phone to airplane mode as soon as I arrived, since I knew there was no use trying to find a signal. I planned to check in with my brother when I left. He was the only one who insisted on a proof-of-life text during my trips. I didn't even bring my laptop, just a Kindle and some headphones. That night, I prepared dinner and settled on the couch with a movie I had downloaded. Have you ever had that eerie sensation of being watched even when you're alone? I dismissed it as just the wind. The way the trees scraped against the cabin made the place feel alive. The following morning, I decided to go for a short hike along a trail that looped behind the property. It was foggy but absolutely beautiful. When I returned, I noticed something odd. My phone was no longer on the bedside table where I had left it charging. I searched the entire cabin, including the bathroom and kitchen, even checking inside the fridge out of frustration. Eventually, I found my phone under the bed, which was puzzling since I hadn't touched it since my arrival. It was off despite being plugged in. I turned it on just to check everything was all right. That was when I noticed it. The Find My Phone app was open, and a green dot was pulsing on the screen. It was my phone, but the app was showing its location somewhere else. The dot was a few feet off, and as I refreshed it, I realized the marker was slowly moving. It was right beneath the cabin floor. I stood frozen, watching my own phone drift across the screen as if someone was carrying it. My body felt numb, like my brain was struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. I leaned down, pressing my ear to the wooden floor. I could have sworn I heard something shuffling underneath. I wanted to believe it was a glitch or a delayed GPS ping from before, but the movement seemed too deliberate, like someone was transporting it. The crawl space came to mind immediately, along with the locked door in the hallway. I found the door once more and tried the handle, but it was still locked. I even searched for a key in drawers and kitchen cabinets, hoping the owner had left one. No luck. The lock looked old, as if it hadn't been opened in years. I returned to the living room and sat there for a while, trying to think logically. It was possible I had dropped my phone and imagined the app being open, but a part of me knew better. Something felt off in that cabin now. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It felt staged. I called out just to break the silence. "Hello!" It echoed sharply in the small space, as if the walls were holding their breath. I felt silly, but said it again louder. "Anyone there?" I didn't really expect a reply, and thankfully none came. The rest of the day dragged on. I left the phone on the kitchen table and avoided looking at it. But as night fell, I couldn't withstand it any longer. I turned it on again and opened Find My Phone, only to see the green dot still moving. Same direction, still beneath me. That night, sleep came slowly. Every creak felt amplified, as if the house was straining to listen. I kept thinking about the dot on the screen and what might be under the floor. Around 2 a.m., I heard a soft scraping sound beneath my bed. My heart raced as I sat bolt upright, too scared to let my feet touch the floor. It wasn't a rat. There were no scurrying sounds or squeaks. It was slower, more methodical, like nails being dragged across old wood. I stared at the crawlspace door down the hallway, still shut. Eventually, the sound stopped, and I somehow drifted off to sleep, more from exhaustion than comfort. In the morning, I forced myself to act as if everything was normal. I made coffee, read a chapter of my book, but when I checked my phone again, the dot had moved. This time, it was under the kitchen. I followed the marker until I stood right above it. I knocked on the floor once, then twice, and on the third knock, I heard it. 3 slow knocks in response from beneath. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. I wanted to leave right then. It felt as if the house had consumed them. I attempted to call out again, my panic escalating. Who's down there? There was no answer this time, not even a tap. I retreated into the bedroom, closed the door, and wedged a chair under the knob as if I were in a low-budget horror film. I despised how authentic everything felt. I flipped open the Airbnb welcome binder, searching for emergency contact details. Nothing useful was included, just takeout menus and nearby attractions. Yet, on the last page, in small handwriting, someone had scrawled a note. It said, "Don't open the crawl space, no matter what you hear." The note sent a shiver through me. I remained there, staring at it for what felt like an eternity, trying to comprehend its meaning. Who wrote this? Why was it in my welcome binder? It was all baffling. Could it be a prank? Or was someone genuinely trying to caution me about something that had occurred there previously? I contemplated leaving right then, yet something prevented me. Perhaps it was arrogance or the fear of seeming paranoid. But I couldn't just flee. Not when I was still clueless about what was happening and where my keys had gone. I felt as if I were losing grip on the situation, and that made me want to cling to whatever I could. I thought about reaching out to someone, anyone, but there was no signal. I tried texting my sister once more, but my messages wouldn't send. I checked Find My iPhone again. The green dot remained visible, just beneath the kitchen floor. It had shifted since the previous night, just as before, slowly creeping as if something was pacing under the boards. I attempted to reassure myself. I could manage this. I had to manage this. I took my flashlight and returned to the kitchen. The air felt unusually still, almost suffocating. As I approached the floorboards, a strong sensation of something observing me washed over me, waiting. My heart raced. The dot on the map hadn't moved significantly, yet I could sense it now beneath my feet. I knelt down, illuminating the area beneath the kitchen table, then along the floorboards. My fingers grazed something coarse and jagged. I froze, holding my breath. I needed to pull away before I touched whatever lay below. I didn't know what I anticipated, but it wasn't that. The crawlspace door had shifted slightly, as if someone or something had pushed against it. A cold breeze seeped through the crack, and I heard it once more, quieter this time. A faint scraping noise. Was it merely my imagination? Was the house inhaling and exhaling? I grasped the door handle with trembling hands. It turned just enough to reveal a glimpse into the shadowy space beyond. I felt as though I was about to make a grave error, but some morbid curiosity compelled me forward. I yanked the door open. The crawl space was dim, yet I could discern a faint silhouette of something in the far corner. I stepped back. Something was moving in the space, but I couldn't possibly see it. I glanced down at my phone, then back to the crawl space. The green dot was still shifting. The sensation of being monitored hit me with full force, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for my next action. In a rush of fear, I slammed the door shut. My thoughts were in turmoil. I couldn't fathom what was occurring. Why did the app display that? Why were my belongings vanishing? And who or what was lurking under the floor? I attempted to leave again, but the house seemed to be dragging me back, as if the walls were tightening around me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and noticed an alert from Find My iPhone. The dot had moved yet again. It was now closer, beneath my feet. It was time to escape. I gathered my belongings and tried the door lock. I felt confined, as though the house had made its choice, and I no longer held the reins. I was hesitant to touch my phone again, but I couldn't resist. The dot was shifting once more, right to where I stood. It had been beneath the floor, but now it was within reach. I could hear something scraping on the other side of the wall, just behind the cabinets. Something was crawling. Something was not allowing me to leave. I was 37 at the time, recently divorced and still getting used to weekends without my son. I worked as a network engineer, mostly from home, which provided flexible hours but also a lot of solitude. That summer, I decided to book a small beach Airbnb in the Outer Banks, Oregon, just for the two of us. I thought a change of scenery would help us both relax a little. The house was a raised beach cottage, painted white with chipped paint, and perched on wooden stilts like many in the area. A long wooden staircase led up to the front door, and there was an eerie crawl space underneath. The listing described it as having rustic charm, but it felt more forgotten than endearing. My son Harry didn't seem to care. He was just excited about the ocean. We arrived just before sunset, with a pink sky and the sound of waves audible from the porch. Inside, the house had a faint smell of salt and old wood, the kind of scent that brings memories of the sea. I unpacked our things while Harry excitedly rushed from room to room, claiming the bunk bed in the guest room. Felt like a good start to the weekend. That first evening, we ate grilled cheese sandwiches on the porch and watched the tide come in. Harry said he wished his mom could be there too. I nodded, trying not to let the weight of that thought consume me. His mother, Lisa, had passed away 2 years earlier after a long illness. He didn't often speak about her, so I was caught off guard when he suddenly asked, "Do you think Mommy can see us from under the house?" He swung his legs off the porch swing, and I blinked, thinking I misheard him, so I asked him to clarify. "Under the house?" he repeated, pointing at the crawl space. "She was looking at me last night before we got here." I laughed awkwardly and told him he must have had a dream. That night, after putting him to bed, I stood outside and gazed at the underside of the house. The porch light cast shadows deep in the crawl space, making it look like a dark void. I attributed Harry's comment to a child's imagination, or perhaps to the complexities of grief manifesting in unusual ways. Still, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that settled in my chest. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps above me, even though I was in the master bedroom upstairs. It sounded like someone was walking along the porch, then stopping right outside my window. I sat up slowly, trying to stifle my panic, and listened closely. The night was silent, save for the occasional crash of waves in the distance. I got out of bed and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside gently. No one was there, just the empty wooden deck bathed in pale moonlight. I opened the sliding glass door and stepped outside barefoot, expecting to find raccoon tracks or driftwood washed up from the beach. The porch was strangely clean. No sand, no dirt, not even dew. I stood there for a few moments, listening to the waves and my own heartbeat. That was when I heard something shift directly beneath me. It was faint but unmistakable, like the crunch of gravel or movement on dry sand. I leaned over the railing and peered toward the crawl space, but it was too dark to see anything. The next morning, I didn't mention the sounds I'd heard during the night. Harry was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table and drawing with crayons from his backpack. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned over to see what he was creating. It looked like the house, and beneath it was a figure drawn in black. I asked him who it was supposed to be, and he smiled as if it were obvious. "It's Mommy," he said, "but she doesn't like when you look at her." I tried to keep my voice steady and inquired why he said that. Harry shrugged and continued coloring. "She told me last night. She's still really cold." I stared at him, my coffee growing cold in my hand, unsure how to react. I knew that kids process loss in odd ways. I'd read about it somewhere. Yet something about the way he said it felt unsettling. It didn't sound like a child reminiscing and felt almost too recent. After breakfast, we took a walk on the beach to clear our heads. The breeze was strong, and the ocean loud, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Harry held my hand tighter than usual, only letting go to pick up seashells, and I noticed he kept glancing back at the house. Once we returned, I finally decided to check the crawl space. There was a small wooden access hatch on the side, partially buried in sand and worn by years of salt air. I pried it open with some effort, coughing at the musty air that escaped. Harry stood behind me, quiet and still. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and crouched down, shining it into the darkness. The light revealed sand, old pipes and cobwebs, Nothing unusual for a beach house. But the longer I examined it, the more I noticed strange impressions in the sand, as if something had been dragged through there or someone. That night, Harry refused to sleep in his room. He kept saying it was too close to the floor. I let him sleep in my room instead. She didn't want you to go. She said, "You promised." I was at a loss for words, so I just held him until he dozed off. Once I was sure he was asleep, I got up and went to the kitchen for some water. The floorboards creaked as I walked past the guest room, and then I froze. From underneath the floor, right beneath that room, I heard something. Breathing. It wasn't the wind or the pipes. It was too rhythmic, too steady. I pressed my ear to the wood and held my breath. For a full 10 seconds, there was silence. Then, softly, I heard a knock, like fingers tapping once, slowly, methodically, just below me. I stepped back, my heart racing, unable to make sense of it. I hardly slept that night, constantly checking the floor beneath the bed, waiting for another sound. Harry was restless as well, mumbling in his sleep and clutching my shirt as if he were a toddler, even though he was almost 9. By morning, I felt more exhausted than I had the night before. We spent most of the day out, playing mini-golf and having lunch in town, anything to escape the house. I tried to convince myself it was just stress and grief manifesting in a strange way. But Harry hardly touched his food, and each time we passed a vent or drain, he stared too long. "She's still there," he whispered once, without me prompting him. That night was our last there, and I wanted to leave early. I packed most of our things and let Harry fall asleep on the couch watching cartoons. I didn't want him near the floor. I stepped outside to clear my mind, walking around the house towards the crawl space again. The hatch was still loose from the day before, but something felt different. It had been propped open just a little. I crouched down and shone the flashlight inside, but I barely made it 2 feet in before something caught my eye. There were footprints, small ones, like a child's, leading toward the far corner. I called out, "Hello," even though I knew it was a mistake. My voice echoed hollowly down there as if the air was thicker. Nothing responded, but I could have sworn I heard a soft scuttling sound, like someone retreating on hands and knees. Trying to be quiet, I quickly pulled back, my heart racing. Back inside, Harry was sitting up on the couch when I walked in. His eyes were glassy. "She's mad," he said, hugging his knees. "You saw her without asking," I replied, not knowing what else to say. I just locked every door and window and sat there holding my son while the night stretched on. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I heard something scrape across the floor above us, but there was no one upstairs. We had been sleeping downstairs all night. I stood still for a moment, but curiosity, or maybe fear, overcame me. I grabbed the flashlight and slowly made my way up the stairs. The upstairs hallway was cold, much colder than it should have been in July. I walked toward the end where Harry's room was, and that's when I heard it again. A whisper, faint and fragile, like a voice trying to break through gusty winds, called my name once. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I snatched Harry off the couch, still half asleep, and we dashed out the front door and into the car. I didn't care that it was dark or that we left things behind. I needed to get us as far from that house as I could. We arrived home that afternoon, and I haven't booked another Airbnb since. Harry doesn't bring up that trip anymore, not even casually. But a few weeks later, I caught him whispering under his bed one night. When I asked him who he was talking to, he said, "Mom's just checking if you came back. I don't know what we experienced out there, and I don't want to. I've passed by the Outer Banks once since then, but I couldn't bring myself to turn off the highway." Whatever was beneath that house wasn't grief or memory. It was waiting for someone, and I think it still is. At 24, I had just left college when I made the decision to travel solo across the United States. Feeling exhausted from school, I needed a break to gather my thoughts. I found an affordable Airbnb in Cedar City, Nevada, a small basement space managed by an elderly couple. The photos looked good, and the price was right, so I booked it. Upon my arrival, the couple welcomed me warmly. The husband was somewhat reserved, but his wife was quite friendly, giving me a quick tour of the basement. It was cozy and functional, just a simple spot to sleep for the night. She pointed out the bathroom and shared the Wi-Fi password, but she didn't mention much else, especially the locked door in the corner. After a long journey, I unpacked swiftly and sank onto the couch to relax. That's when I noticed something peculiar. The door had 4 padlocks on it. It resembled a closet, yet the heavy locks suggested whatever was behind it was important to keep hidden. When I asked her about the door, she merely smiled, saying, "It's just some old storage." Later, as I tried to get some rest, a chill settled over the basement despite the heater, and I could hear creaking sounds from above. I attempted to dismiss it, thinking it was just the couple moving around, but the noises seemed too intentional. Eventually, I turned off the lights, trying to fall asleep, but my mind was still fixated on that locked door. At around 2 a.m., I woke abruptly to a soft knocking sound emerging from behind the door. I froze, staring into the darkness. There was no chance anyone was in there, for locks kept it secure. Maybe it was just the house settling, or perhaps my imagination was running wild. But the knocking continued, too clear to overlook. My heart raced as I debated whether to venture upstairs and inquire about it. But what would I say? It felt silly to mention I thought I heard something from a locked room. I tried to drift off to sleep once more, but then the knocking came again, this time louder. Anxiety overcame me. I sat up in bed, focused on the door, now absolutely certain I was not imagining the noise. This was rhythmic knocking, like someone was tapping from the other side. I thought of leaving, but it was late, and I was too weary for any hasty decisions. I reassured myself it was just a trivial noise, perhaps an animal outside. Yet that explanation faded as the knocking continued in a steady pattern, growing louder. I pulled the blankets over my head, trying to block it out, but the sound persisted. Finally, I could no longer bear the suspense. Grabbing my phone, I activated the flashlight and gingerly approached the door. I stood still before it, the knocking still faintly resonating. I held my breath, contemplating whether to open it or go upstairs to face the couple. The beam from my phone flickered in my hand, casting long shadows. The knocking persisted, each tap more urgent than the last. My heart raced as I examined the 4 locks, each one securely fastened. I was convinced no one could be in there, at least that's what I thought. But as the knocking intensified, the urgency became undeniable. Something or someone lurked behind that door, and I was the only one who could hear it. A moment later, the knocking ceased. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise. It felt as if the air around me had thickened, suffocating me. My mind spun through every possible scenario, but none made sense. I stepped back, half expecting the door to swing open, but it remained motionless. Taking a deep breath, I approached the door again. The knocking had stopped, but a new unsettling sound emerged. Soft breathing, barely audible, from behind the locked door. My heart raced as I tried to comprehend it. Could it be an animal or perhaps an intruder? The house felt as though it was closing in on me. I pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The locks were too secure, and there was no way to access whatever lay behind them without keys. I glanced at the staircase leading to the couple's area of the house. Should I go up and ask them about it? The thought felt ludicrous. What could I possibly say? Is someone trapped in that room down there? Everything felt too unreal. I stepped back from the door and sank back onto the couch, my thoughts racing. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being observed, that something was lurking just outside the door. The longer I remained, the stronger the feeling of something malevolent became. I checked my phone and saw that it was already well past 3 a.m. I needed to take action, but my body was paralyzed by fear. The next morning, I awoke with a throbbing headache and the impression that I hadn't slept at all. The basement was hauntingly silent, and the recollection of the previous night's occurrences hung over me like a dark shadow. I hurriedly gathered my belongings, deciding I couldn't spend another night there. However, as I picked up my bag and walked upstairs to talk to the couple, I hesitated. They were in the kitchen, sipping coffee as if nothing had happened. I couldn't bring myself to inquire about the locked room or the sounds I had heard. It all felt too ridiculous. So instead, I just smiled, waved goodbye, and left. While driving out of Provo, I looked at the Airbnb listing once more, and my stomach sank. There, in the description, was a line I had overlooked before. Please do not enter the basement room. It is locked for your safety. It hit me like a gut punch. What had I stumbled into? What was contained in that room? The drive back felt lengthy and uncomfortable. My thoughts replayed the events repeatedly. I couldn't let go of the idea of that locked room. Why hadn't I noticed that line in the listing earlier? I recalled the couple's strange conduct. Why didn't they seem bothered when I mentioned the knocking? Felt like I was going insane. It wasn't until a week later that the disturbing truth began to reveal itself. A message appeared on my phone, a notification from the Airbnb host. The message was simple but sent a chill down my spine. We noticed you seemed curious about the basement. We hope you found the experience enlightening. Please remember to respect the privacy of others. The wording felt strange, off-kilter, as if they were aware of something I wasn't. My immediate instinct was to respond, to ask what they were talking about, but something kept me from doing so. Instead, I went online to search for any reviews or mentions of the house, hoping to find someone else who had stayed there. What I discovered sent chills down my spine. One review caught my attention. I wouldn't recommend staying in the basement room. Some things should remain locked away. That was all it said, but it was enough. The more I reflected on it, the more questions flooded my mind. What was in that room? And why was it securely locked? I had to find out. I called the Airbnb host, but when they answered, the conversation felt odd and strangely detached. They behaved as if they had no knowledge of the locked room or the bizarre events that had occurred. However, at the end of the call, they casually mentioned something that sent a chill through me. We have a policy here, It's best not to ask too many questions about the house. The statement was vague and unhelpful, but their tone felt unsettling. I realized I was edging too close to something they wanted to keep hidden. I couldn't dismiss it. I had to uncover what was concealed in that room. So I began to dig deeper. I found more disturbing rumors about the house online. One user claimed to have witnessed strange shadows moving in the windows late at night. Another mentioned hearing whispers that were soft and unintelligible when no one else was around. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was not right. The feeling of dread lingered with me. I started noticing odd things occurring around me, small details that didn't add up. My phone screen flickering as if someone were scrolling through my photos, or hearing a soft knock on the walls late at night when no one else was present. I didn't want to believe it, but I felt as though I was being watched. Then one night, as I lay in bed, I received another message from the Airbnb host. The message was cryptic, just a few words. You shouldn't have asked. Now you'll know. My heart raced, and I immediately tried to call the number back, but there was no response. The message had no name, no context, just an unsettling warning. I couldn't help but feel like everything was spiraling into something much darker than I had anticipated. Was it merely paranoia? Or had I uncovered something terrible that I was not supposed to know? I couldn't shake the feeling that the locked room, the knocks, and the messages were all part of a much larger mystery. Something I had no business uncovering.